Right, thank you all very much for coming today. I'll tell you a little bit about where this talk came from. It started off as a request for prioritization, people coming from kind of continuous delivery development environments saying, how do we prioritize what we do? And now I have come from the product management community, and so it's actually really great to join forces on this. By and large, I don't know if you know this, but product managers don't love continuous delivery. Is there anyone here who considers themselves to be doing a product management type role at the moment? Yeah, okay. And you are obviously the exception. For the most part, you know, they see this as orthogonal to their concerns. They see this as something which they're worried about, the business, the customer, and these developers want to mess around with pipelines, and they don't understand our horizons, and they just don't get it. And so for the most part, I think product managers don't understand what continuous delivery can bring them, or even, you know, to be honest, what Agile really brings them in a business context. And so I want to talk a little bit about that, about the extending the techniques that's actually happening. You know, there's sort of movements around this that I want to introduce you to and share some of my own experiences doing this in a business. So I work at Redgate, as Steve said. It's a company that does database DevOps solutions, but I'm not here to talk about that today. It's a fairly small company, so it's 250 people, and so it's small enough that we can still kind of make some changes, get things done, pick up new techniques, but it's definitely big enough that adopting change becomes painful, and we don't have, you know, it's big enough that we have innovators' dilemmas, it's big enough that we have, but it works, why would you change it, all those things holding people back. It's been around 18 years also, so we have a whole mix of products which are very mature through to products which are coming through. So we really have like the full microcosm of product management challenges in front of us. I started off as a developer. I was a really terrible developer. I was a complete hacker. I remember a job interview and they asked me if I knew what JUnit was. I was like, what? Why would you want that? I have learned, I reformed, but you know, I was that guy. I've come to this the hard way by being a skeptic. I switched from development to product management when I got really sick of being told to do stupid things. And I said, that's ridiculous, I can do better at that. It turned out it wasn't quite so easy, but I'm still glad I did make the switch. And now in my company, I manage a whole portfolio of products. I manage a team of product managers. And like I say, a range of about 30 different individual products, individual units of functionality. So I will hold my hand up and tell you one more thing about myself, and having come from that skeptic background, I love Agile. No, I mean, I really love Agile, and I say this because I've been doing IT jobs for, this is my 25th year, and so I know what it was like before, and I look around and I see lots of young faces, and I'm not sure you know how terrible the world was before this came along. And so I just look at the insight in the Agile Manifesto. I look at this document and think that this is going to keep giving for like another 100 years. We're going to be delving into the secrets of Agile and uncovering things and making changes based on that. I really, really passionately bought into these principles. Scrum, take it or leave it, right? That's an implementation detail, but the principles behind it. Now, when this gets wheeled out in continuous delivery things, I know that we often look at it and say, ha-ha, through early and continuous delivery, those words are right there in the Agile Manifesto, continuous delivery. And that's true, but I want to focus on this bit right here, the valuable software part. So yes, early and continuous delivery, but a valuable software. And that's the thing that sometimes gets left out of the discussion, I think. So a brief history of value, with apologies to the late, great Stephen Hawking. I like to imagine this as the next book he would have written had he had the chance. We're both from Cambridge, so I feel like, you know, we've mind melded on this. Too soon? Sorry. So I want to talk a little bit about value and a history of prioritization, a history of these techniques to show how we've arrived where we are today and making decisions about what to deliver in our products. So again, for the youngsters in the crowd, it used to be, in the bad old days, these big bang releases, and I was delighted to see when Elizabeth asked that nobody was still in a context of these big bang releases. But back in ye olden days, everybody, you know, kind of piled in with their requirements, and releases were about, you know, kind of 6 to 12 months long. Is there anyone here who goes back that far, has at least worked at some point in a, yeah, so you guys know this. And the specs used to look something like this. Sorry, you probably can't read it, but it includes things like, the process claim button shall be located near the bottom of the screen under all the input fields. And to be fair, we didn't have a lot of choices because, you know, we were writing in Java, we didn't even have Swing then, you know, so we didn't have choices about where we were going to put stuff anyway. And things got written like that in specifications. And these specs were like for product people, the center, like the battleground of all political conflict happened in these specs. They were practically weaponized. And so we would get together and try to prioritize based on must, should, could, would or won't, depending on when, what you like to use W for. And we would all get together, we would argue over this, and then we would use that to shoulder each other's requirements out. And it was based on a combination of what this manager thought and that customer commitment and all the different things, and then the dependencies that went into it. And it didn't represent much more than a collective view of opinions of a lot of people into this document. And these were bad days, right? These spec days were very, very, very bad days about how we prioritize. We didn't really have a sense of tying that to our user value very well at all. It was all just this mystified, political layer in between. So we moved forwards. We got agile. Things got better. We now had a team and a product owner, we're doing Scrum, and a feedback loop where the team shipped software and the product owner helped with backlogs, and we kind of went round, and this was good. This was definitely progress over the spec days. So even though I'm going to criticize this in a minute, this was real progress. This was a big, big, big difference, and all of you here remember from those Big Bang release days that this is a huge step forwards. And so, the question is then, what's the problem? Well, let's go back to, brief history of value. So we had our Big Bang releases. We had people stuffing the box, trying to get everything in because they knew they wouldn't get a second chance. But this is from Big Bangs to black holes. So the thing that, and again, don't take this the wrong way, but the real users are a bit of a black hole for a lot of Agile as it's implemented. So we go around in our, our internal loops here, and eventually something gets shipped out to a real user, and then it's never heard from again. Many products that people ship, many services, get very little back from the users. They might get some performance data about how it's actually, is it running, is it up, is it doing that? But is it actually meeting the user needs? And again, this sort of black hole where we don't even get particles coming back, or the occasional thing where you have to use a telescope to see that, that this might have actually given some users some value, but we're not sure. And so by and large, we're going around that loop, and that's pretty healthy, but then that loop out to the real customers is not so healthy. And so again, hopefully you forgive me for calling it black hole agile, but that's most of what I see. We deal with a lot of customers who are trying to implement DevOps, and we don't see a huge amount of getting that data back from the users about whether it's satisfying the business requirements. And so that's sort of where we are today in the state of the art for prioritization for the most part. So most prioritization techniques are designed around this model, where we actually have lots of healthy internal loops, and that's good. We have product owners saying whether they got what they wanted, and it's all good. But then when it finally goes out to the customer, well, that part is kind of all speculation. So when Elizabeth was talking about data over speculation, the business part of this is still almost entirely speculation in, again, most companies I come across. If yours aren't like that, major kudos. By a comparative study across lots of them, almost everybody is. Almost everybody is still going on speculation at the business level. And so these techniques that you see, and I actually did a little bit of a study on various ones, came up with 25 that I could distinguish of different things like this, but most of them, stack ranking, scorecards, by a feature, they all are looking at an estimate of value, some number about value, which is relative to the other things you can think of doing. And they look at a cost, so somebody makes an estimate and judges whether they think that cost versus the benefit is approximately worth it. And that's the principle of prioritization around this black hole agile. It pretty much always looks like this. And so here's a typical ranking spreadsheet. And this is just one taken from an MSDN article about, sorry, I'm drink. About prioritization. And it's for example only, but I've seen so many of these over time. The typical ranking spreadsheet gives a benefit, possibly a penalty. If you're forward thinking, you'll understand that every feature actually has some downside to it in the UI. And it gives a cost, so somebody will have to have done an estimate to make that cost. And then it will also give a risk to it. And from all of this data, it will put it all together, munge it up, and then it'll give you a number at the end and say, this is the one we should do first. Now, sorry if you can see me. Now again, this isn't a bad thing. Compared to where we were, this is a huge step forwards. And so, I'm not trying to say that we, that this is not better than the original specs we used to write. This is miles forward. We have a tool we can use to have discussions around, to externalize our thinking, to explain what we think is the business value, and to have really good conversations around. So this isn't bad, right? This isn't the worst thing in the world. But the question then is what lies beyond the black hole, where we have access to customers, we have feedback loops coming back from customers. What does that actually look like, and what does it mean for calculations of value? So I'll appeal to Vasco Duarte, who's one of the no estimates guys, along with Neil Killick. And I don't know, again, if you guys have come across the whole no estimates movement, but when I first came across this as a product manager, I was like, what? How do you expect me to prioritize without estimates? Can't be done. And it turns out that there is machinery, there is theory around this, which makes sense, that sort of drip funding models, things like you do a little bit, you see, is it working? You do more. You don't necessarily need to have a sense of what the entire cost of an entire big effort is. And that's much, much, much more compatible with the continuous delivery mechanisms we've got in place. But the point here is that Agile it's just not just a software technique, it's actually a philosophy of business in disguise. And if you look at it as just a software technique, you're missing out on a good half the value it can actually give to a business. And just because it didn't come from the business community, I think that some business people can be quite resistant to it, to applying it as a business technique. But that's, again, we're grown-ups here. We understand. We need to take a look at this and take that very seriously. So if we look at Agile as a philosophy of business instead of just a philosophy of software, we can think about that. We can extend this continuous delivery model. And I'm so pleased that we have Dave here. Because normally I just say, and I totally cribbed this, but if I've got it wrong, we also can have somebody tell me that I've misunderstood. I don't believe so. In fact, I found this really revelationary when we had this conversation. So we all know, continuous delivery is about shortening cycle times. And we just saw Elizabeth's, she had a very rich model of all the different things, not just dev, CI, except all the different cycles that we go through, starting with, on a developer's machine, all the way out to pre-prod and then eventually prod. And so we understand that the benefits of shortening that cycle time, of reducing batch size, we get that. The point is, though, that if you take production and bring that into this, then you can actually test a business hypothesis as well as just a software hypothesis. So each time you're going out through production, you actually have an opportunity to think, did this actually do the thing I thought it was going to do? And that's something that in some mature businesses, which are very data-driven, they have good mechanisms for actually judging that. And in the vast majority of software that we write, that we interact with, we don't take care to judge that. Now, again, I can hold my hand up and I can come up with lots of genuinely good reasons this is hard. It is in many cases really hard to judge whether this had the business outcome you were really hoping for. And part of that is, you may be shipping some feature just to give a customer confidence that you can execute. So did it do that thing? Well, okay, you can ask them if they are now confident, so you can take a judgment of it, but it's not necessarily something that every single one you can measure. And it's just one of those facts that not everything true is measurable. However, I think we really let ourselves off the hook with those excuses because an awful lot of stuff is measurable, even in enterprise software businesses. So the point here then is to extend those techniques, extend that way of thinking all the way out to those business loops and try to judge the impact of our work as we go. And if it's successful, do more. And if it's not successful, change tack. Or if you think something else is the biggest priority, move on to that. So that's the principle here around prioritization. Instead of just on features, you take the business outcome you're looking for and judge whether the thing is actually doing that. So prioritization methods become much less about scheduling and ordering work, like what's all we can think of, and the customer seems to want, and then shifting it around, backlog jockeying. It's not about that in a continuous delivery world anymore, not if you actually want to get the benefits. It's much more about selecting and solving the high-value business problems. So, for example, if in your business it's actually a problem with churn that you're trying to address, then that is the business problem. You need to solve your churn problem, and then everything beyond that is not, it shouldn't go through a translation layer of, to solve churn, product manager thinks these 5 things will do it and then hands that to dev team. If you're actually serious about shortening your cycle times all the way through, these cycles pull in and you have to equip your development teams with that business context. Otherwise, you've got this tremendous bottleneck of this product manager sitting there, just handing the work back and forth and repackaging it and feeling awesome because, we're like the most important person in the business, the center of the world. And so they don't have an incentive to change this. But this is, for the whole system, this is not healthy. This is not the way it can work. That development team has to be made aware. And I know this is really controversial, and I hear about the mushroom developer who doesn't want to talk to anyone, who just wants to engineer and all of that. I find that incredibly insulting. I don't know about you guys, but in my experience, people become that way because you treat them that way. And that exposing developers to those business problems has actually solved a whole bunch of other issues that I've had. So for example, that whole thing about, they just don't understand the horizons, they just want to spend all their time on pipelines. If they actually understand that business context, you don't find that those discussions are so painful anymore. It's still a tough trade-off, it's still hard, but it's not like somebody else from the outside is like, you just don't understand, I'm gonna decree it shall be thus. Those discussions become a lot easier because they've got their eye on that thing that software is trying to achieve. So you have to, if you want to shorten that outer loop, you have to equip your development teams with that context. So I'm going to give you the example now of how we do this in my business. We use objectives and key results. And first of all, there are a number of ways you can go about this, a number of mechanisms for doing it. This is one of many. It's one that we found works for us, in part because there's a lot written on it. We can just point to other sources and say, Google does this, so people don't immediately think we're smacked out for inventing our own thing. We do have, it's modified from what Google does. We don't take it all the way down to the individual level and use that to beat people up. We try to keep that in a healthy environment where we use it to inspect and adapt our work. And the idea here, does anybody use these, first of all? Awesome. And of those who don't use them, how many are familiar with this? Good, okay, so I won't go into exceptional detail. The point though is to specify what is it we are trying to achieve, what is the objective, and this doesn't have to be directly measurable, but it should be something significant, something everyone can look at and be like, yep, that's valuable, I want that. And some traceability back to business strategy. And so that's the objective level thing, but then the key results are a way of measuring progress towards it. Now, we found that we still haven't shortened our feedback loops short enough that we really can be measuring all of our business outcomes, our progress towards satisfying our business outcome within the time that, within that particular time chunk. So we've had to develop other techniques about slicing our work, a bit, let it cook, bit, let it cook. We're still working on it. We still want to get those shorter and get to, the real prize. But this is actually difficult. It's difficult to measure as you go. And so we found that we had to actually separate out progress along with a piece of work from the actual progress on the business results. We almost had 2 levels of KRs in there. But the general structure of what we're doing here is that, first of all, we have development teams who are aware of business context. They have to talk to users. They have to have conversations with marketing and sales, and they have to understand that, if this week's problem is about, a huge blocking feature, it does sometimes happen, we can get back into features, then that's relevant. But if in fact it's about an overall quality issue and the features don't really matter, they need to understand that too. And they also need to understand to the level of what the business is looking for. So when some people write about this, like Donald Reinertsen writes loads of really great stuff about development flow and cost of delay, and these are really important thinking tools to get through this. But one of the things he'll say is that it's profit. What is the impact on profit? And not every context that's going to be like the God metric. If you're working for government, that's not obviously the thing, but also in startups, it's not about profit. It's about some growth metrics, some certain things like that. So your context is going to depend on what that ultimate goal, that top level goal is. And we don't need to shield developers from it. They can take it. So all the development teams need to be involved in this user research. The market research is mostly supplied by the product manager, but again, just a steady stream of things so that people know what's going on outside their 4 walls. And we use a sequence of first, make sure we all agree with what a team is for. Why do they even exist? The next step is to generate ideas from our objectives, and that's taking in particularly that business context and the business priorities at the moment. And then we'll select from some options based on that team's purpose, the company's strategy, and the business impact. And that's one where, so this is where our equivalent of that, that speculation and risk is coming in right there. We don't know. Nobody will know what that business impact is. It helps to have people who are experienced in your domain and experienced in that whole context. But when it comes to guessing at that, and that's one of the things that, so frustrating about those prioritization spreadsheets is that they, fact, it is a 5 for business value. I mean, come on, guys. This is our best guess. The thing we do is we go out with our best guess, and then we do things to de-risk it as we go along. We agree on our key results. So what will it look like in data? Not necessarily, things that are coming back from our application, but what will it look like? It could be reaching out to users, running surveys. It could be any combination of things that will say we're making progress towards this. And then within that, we find that then it's to the team. Then they can actually we use a double diamond technique. It's another kind of thing you can look up if you're interested. But it's basically a technique that come out of the design community to explore a user problem, then focus on some solution ideas, and then actually, again, make it more concrete in the second half. So it's the design-led technique to try to solve an actual problem rather than, again, feature. Is this feature really good? So here's an example of it. And you don't really need to know our products. I'll just tell you this one is a sort of productivity tool. It has a number of different sort of headline features. It has today 3 headline features in this product. And so the objective might be to increase the number of features a SQL prompt user uses. And you notice how badly this translates into that kind of spreadsheet mechanism, because this is the thing that the team is going to try to achieve. There's no way we ever could have expressed this in a sequence of visible user stories very easily. We can get our ideas, but that thing to increase the average number of features a user uses, it's much better at the objective level. It makes more sense. So why? It's company strategy to reduce churn. We have good data that shows that feature usage correlates with continuing to repurchase our product. So just a little bit extra context, we do actually install on a user's machine. We're not SaaS either, so we've had to put in lots of telemetry to gather data back about usage in the first place. But once we've got it, we can actually see what's going on there. And we are a license model, but people pay maintenance, so support and upgrades. So churn for us means people are deciding, nah, I don't need support and upgrades anymore. So yes, we have some good evidence. We've got some facts which show that those two things are correlated. Might not be causal, but hey, so it's the data we have. And we have further evidence that a discovery of our capabilities is poor. So for example, if we put out marketing saying, hey, did you know about this great feature? It gets a lot of clicks because people are like, no, totally didn't know. So we have evidence there from all the different sources about, where we might focus our efforts. But the team is closest to this product. The team is closest to these users. It's closest to the actual, the code, so they know which things are most likely to have an impact. And so they could answer this in any number of ways. They could write a whole new major feature. They could improve a single one of what they had today. They could improve the discoverability. They could do any number of things. And I don't think any of us could guess up front what the right answer would be. All the different ones are quite plausible, and the only way we could ever find out is to do a piece and measure it, and do a piece and measure it. So again, for us, for doing this in a continuous delivery world where we're actually trying to solve a business problem of reducing churn on this product, this is the right mechanism for us to use. And so we might have some key results. So you segment by your user cohorts and what you expect the behaviors to actually be on them and all of that. This is a nice example. Not all of our examples turn out this nice, and it's very, very hard to keep featureism out of your objectives. So I gave this talk once before, and it was a little bit of an idealized view of the world. And here's the one where I'm going to say it actually is hard. If you want to make a transition to this, getting that data in place, the instrumentation in place, the will among your product teams, among your management, it's actually quite hard to switch to this. And I have a lot of sympathy with people who go back to, no, just product owner and features, because complexity. But you are missing out on a bunch of the business value you can get by giving the teams an actual problem to solve and letting them use their copious Cambridge brains, in our case, to give us some business value. So that's an example of our case, of something that works for us in terms of specifying an outcome we're looking for, and then something we can test at the business value level. And then, of course, there's that implication in there that churn will be reduced. And so on an even bigger loop, we'll be looking to see whether over time churn does actually go down. So we have those loops. And again, we are driving all the time to make them visible and shorter on the business loops as well as on the technical loops. And it's hard, but again, if we see the benefits in continuous delivery for the technical concerns, I think we can see all the reasons why this is applicable at the business level as well. And so instead of thinking ourselves as having a roadmap, I like to think of it as lighting the path. So we have a cave system. We have a number of different ways that we could actually get through this. We don't know. We might have some guesses. You know, we feel a breeze coming from that direction. We saw bats that way. We have some information coming at us. And what we need to do is light pieces of it. We need to light this one. If it's looking promising, then we go a bit further on that. If not, backtrack, go down another route. So instead of that roadmap, this is what we're doing. It's a way of exploring a solution space around a problem, around a business problem. Wait, I hear you asking, what about work on your pipeline? So I've already hinted at this, that some discussions become quite a lot easier with the team having some context on this. But it's still actually we found it really difficult. And we've been through several iterations of, we have, how do I want to put it? So we have like business as usual kind of stuff that goes on versus your objective work, and I gather that's quite common. And some other splits like that. In fact, I don't think, just like Elizabeth was saying about managing your test infrastructure, I don't think there's the answer to this. Here are some things I've seen work in various cases. We're making a business case to remove all the impediments to a faster development cycle. You might need to actually pitch it as its own piece of work and its own potential objective. But if you wait every time for it to surface to the top of all the objectives, you would never actually get it done. So you need to be doing the little and often on this. And so I quite like the ratchet so that you make sure it never gets worse, but each time you make sure it gets a little better and a little better and a little better. Or the pipeline tax. So it's over a percentage of time, over a period of time, a percentage is just going on this. And then maybe we play with that. We do a little bit more, we do a little bit less over time. But all these different mechanisms for trying to weave that together, because not everything that team does can possibly be focused on that objective for the whole time. So that is a bit of the sort of theory and practice around why it's incredibly important to extend these techniques to the business. About an example that's worked for us to use objectives and key results to separate out that what are we trying to achieve from what are we actually trying to do to fix it. And so if we look back in history, we have Big Bang, the Big Bang expressing requirements back in the old days, and that, but we still see the vestigial traces of it in our prioritization today. We have the spreadsheets which order features, and we feature jockeys, and that's very common with the black hole Agile. But then for continuous delivery, we must recognize that business hypothesis is a loop. If we want to get the full value, we have to do that. And so we need to remove that translation of the business goal into prioritizable feature. That is just a bottleneck in the whole system. If you keep that in there, you will never be able to shorten your loops beyond a certain point. And finally, once you actually identify what that valuable goal is, then those design-led techniques, and the design community is doing a fantastic job of design sprints, and there's now all kinds of stuff to try to manage risk, to try to build better solutions, explore solution spaces, and find better solutions. And so that's using those techniques, we can then find the solution based on those business requirements. So that was what I wanted to share to you today, or evangelize from my position of loving Agile so much that I thought I needed to internalize that in the business world. Again, I've got a team of product managers working like this today, and it's quite hard to find people who know the experience and the appetite for working like this. So we are recruiting. So if anybody would like to give this a chance in an environment like that, we'd love to hear from you. And thank you. And we seem to have time for questions.